All right, so we're closing out the last unit that looks specifically at surveys and interviews, but we're still talking about research design for 2 more weeks. We've got the midterm approaching on October 6th and one more group discussion before you'll take that. This week we're going to talk about something called sampling. Generally, textbooks cover this unit before they talk about how to do a survey or interview, but I've never understood that approach. Because first you're going to decide how you want to collect your data in most cases, and then you'll want to think about exactly who you want to collect that data from. And figuring out who you want to collect it from is called sampling. So that's what we're focused on this week. That was a little bit circular. But there are different sampling strategies available if you're using a survey or an interview. And so my thought is that it's important to understand those methods before we talk about the more narrow idea of determining who is going to be a part of the data you collected. It's not enough to just collect data. You can write the most beautiful and insightful interview questions imaginable. But unless you ask those questions to the right people, your data won't be worth much. If you interview your classmates to understand the experiences of retirees in the Midwest, you'll get data, but it won't be able to answer your question. Who the right people are is driven by your research question. Your research question should drive who you collect data or how you collect data, and within that is the question of who you will collect the data from. This is a fairly vocabulary heavy chapter. It's a lot of technical terms that you won't necessarily need to memorize. What's really important to take away though is to be able to distinguish between them. Each of these terms has a meaning, has an importance. And so think consciously as you come across those terms in the chapter, the type of data collection that it applies to, whether it's an interview or a survey, and why you would use that strategy. There's a reason we have so many different types of samples. It's not just to make the chapter more complex. It's that each is applicable in a different situation, that we need to have it almost like a tool in the toolbox. You don't want to use a hammer or a screwdriver for everything. Sometimes you need to pull out the lever. The first half of this class is really focused on developing a research question and knowing how to answer it. The second half of the class, we'll talk about actually answering questions. But here we're still trying to figure out how to ask it and how to get something that would allow us to answer that question. And so what the midterm is going to want to see is that if I give you a problem area, give you a research question, can you devise a strategy to collect data to answer that question? That will actually be able, can you collect data that will actually allow you to provide an answer to whatever that question is? And the different samples I described this week are each great, but for answering different questions. So being conscious of those links and trying to come up with a research question you might use each sample for will go a long way to making you look like a pro on the upcoming test. The additional reading on the value of good data helps by making clear some of the other issues that can come up with your data. It goes into a lot more depth on what can happen if we fail to construct a sample in a robust way. The whole point of this class, the overarching question, is understanding how the social sciences build knowledge. How do we know anything? And if we answer questions with bad data or the wrong data, it makes knowing things impossible. That doesn't mean that it's impossible to do good research. It just means that there's a lot we have to keep in mind as we develop our research. That chapter is from a book called Naked Statistics, which is the best introduction to statistics I've ever read. It breaks down all of everything we use in statistics into really understandable and digestible bits. And so hopefully this chapter whets your appetite and drives all of you to get that book. Because I think that that's the best companion to the second half of the class. It's a really untechnical description of statistics. But it's got this great chapter about data collection. And so I thought that it helped to supplement this week's reading. And so have a great week. Stay dry.